was trying to give you a warning. Hello. Welcome everyone to our webinar for the month. So this month we're very excited to be talking about bullying and workplace psychopaths. My name is Rochelle Weir and this is Phil Slade, and we are the founders of Decider. So we have this vision and mission about creating a better world through better decision makers, which is why this topic today is particularly of interest to us. Creating workplaces that are safe and that help people to survive and thrive is really, really important. And so we've had a bit of experience with our work with different clients and working in corporates over the years. And we wanted to share today some of the insights that we have and some of the research that we found in this space. So the session should take us around 30 to 45 minutes today. We're keen to get sort of feedback as you go, so please feel free to contact us through the chat channel. I will share some links throughout the session as well. But let's go over what we're going to cover, yeah?
Let's do it.
Let's do it. So, bullying and psychopaths in the workplace. So we know it's really, really important to understand what that means. It's a really topical issue right now. So we want to cover today, bullies versus workplace psychopaths. Those terms get used interchangeably and they are actually different things. So we just want to go through that a little bit, explain the difference and the cues to look for. So this is one of the best things that you can do is to create self-awareness so that you know what to look for, so that you know how to respond. So we want to make sure that we do that in a way is safe and appropriate.
I think there's probably two disclaimers that come up. The first is that these are really highly emotional topics, and there's some real pain that's associated when we start to talk about the impact of bullying or the impact of psychopaths. And we know that on this webinar, we're going to have some people that are probably been victimized by this and traumatized by psychopathy and bullying. There's probably being some people that are being accused of being psychopaths and bullying, rightly or wrongly. There's probably some people that are looking to create a better system to mitigate or undermine the influence of psychopaths and bullies in the workplace, and a range of other things. I suppose what we would really encourage everyone is to approach these topics and these conversations with a real learning mindset, with a curiosity that allows for a lightness to be able to talk about these sorts of things without sort of getting into the judgmental nature of what this discussion can often descend into. This is not about judging people in this next 45 minutes. And we're going to have a bit of fun, part of what we're going to have a look at. Am I a psychopath? Are you a psychopath? And things like that. So we're going to have some fun with it, but just hold it lightly and have a curious mindset and allow for that lightness of energy and a lightness of emotion to be able to take you through this next 45 minutes. And if you're in that mind space, that will open your mind up to learning about things without judgment. The other thing we would just say, and we're going to touch on this a number of times, is that labels can be really unhelpful at times, and continuing to label things or label people or do things with those labels can sometimes be really, really unhelpful, and we don't want to necessarily accidentally trip into that. But they're good words or conceptual vessels, as we call language and words, for us to start pulling apart and understanding some of the antisocial behaviors and some of the impacts on this place. So you don't find yourself being a bully or a psychopath in the workplace, but also that you have some tools when you are presented with this, either directly as a target or indirectly, where you can see someone else being bullied or the target of a psychopath, and you may need to intervene in some sort of way.
But before we jump into the content, I did want to call out that we have recordings for this session as well as our other sessions through our YouTube channel. I will chuck a link in the chat channel. This is always the test that things work. So love for you to subscribe so that you can be reminded about our upcoming sessions, and we'll talk about that a bit later as well. And you'll be able to watch the replay of this at your leisure. All right, let's do this. So what I wanted to start with is calling out that bullying is so topical. We hear about bullying talked about in schools, in the education system, probably more often than not. And because it's a thing, it is proper thing. This research study was done in 2018, so not that long ago. And it's surprising to see that as many as 3 out of 5 students are experiencing bullying to an extent that they found quite significant. I think that just blows my mind. And for some of these kids, it's happening on a daily basis. So every day they've got to get up and look into the eye of someone that's tormenting them, whether it's verbally, physically, or via social media, via cyberbullying, or in those type of way that they are in some sort of form of mental distress on a daily basis. So it absolutely is a massive concern, which is also why we're doing a lot of work with the Switch for Schools product. We're helping kids to be more resilient and work with emotional intelligence, because we can see what a massive impact it's having. Because bullies and victims, they eventually grow up and they go to work. This study, from Bully Zero tells us, and based on some great data from WorkSafe Australia, so all the work cover claims, that type of thing that looks at, and it just blows my mind to think that 1 in 3 women and 1 in 5 men have lodged mental disorder claims. So this is claims that they've lodged with sort of work cover or WorkSafe Australia to say that they have been involved in harassment or bullying. So that goes that there will be more than that are not potentially lodging claims as well. But just from that data, that the mental stress that people are being put through because of toxic work cultures and antisocial behavior, and it blows my mind that 37% of the workers are being reported that they're being sworn at or yelled at the workplace. This is not a culture that we want to perpetuate.
No.
Because it's not just about the impact to people, but it's also then leaders and organizations having to spend 30% of their day dealing with counterproductive behavior. So rather than getting on with it, helping customers, doing what you need to do, getting the job done, teaching kids, doing whatever it is, you're having to deal with some of these things and the massive impact it's having on people.
So if you are in education, you're a teacher or whatever in education, make sure you get onto Switch for Schools. That's switch4schools.com.au and have a look at what's going on there. And because what happens at schools is they learn the behavior patterns that they're going to take into the workplace, as Rochelle said. But that's not what we're going to deal with today. We're going to say, okay, well, we've got bullies and psychopaths in the workplace. What do we do about it?
Absolutely. So I want you to think about your workplace. And let's think about, maybe could you be the target of bullying? So answer these questions inside your mind. I feel intimidated at work. My boss or my colleagues are degrading me. So microaggressions are things like snide comments or little jibs here and there, or maybe an inappropriate joke, or just things that are made to make you feel small or make you feel worthless. These degrading moments. So you feel degraded. You've been sexually harassed. There's people spreading gossip about you, talking behind your back, and that feeling, because it leads to that last one about I feel excluded and ostracized. Or people are being repeatedly rude and disrespectful toward me. So we expect workplaces to be a civil place. You don't have to be everyone's bestie, but you expect it to be respectful and civil. So if you're experiencing incivility, so if you can say yes to one or more of these, and it's more often than not, you might actually be the target of bullying.
And I think it's really interesting that final point talks about ostracism. And we've got a chat in a question in the chat channel about nonverbal communication, which is a lot of the time nonverbals are around ostracism, what's not being said, what you're not being included in and being left out, and we've got it visibly left out. Interesting enough, when we do psychological analysis of what happens in ostracism. So there's this great experiment where, Rochelle and I might be, and a third person might be throwing a ball with each other. And then all of a sudden, me and this other person just start throwing between ourselves, and Rochelle's left out. And Rochelle feels ostracized. Even telling that story, you're going to feel a bit sad, right? It's really weird what happens. What we found, though, is when we put like the fMRIs and look at what happens in our brains. We do that with a computer screen game. The brain lights up in the same way when Rochelle's feeling ostracized as if she was being physically attacked. So just because it's not physical, the brain interprets the pain in the same sort of way. So ostracism feels as painful as somebody stabbing you in the arm, right? One's physical pain and emotional pain, but the brain doesn't differentiate. And even when we know that Rochelle White-Bridge is playing a computer, so it's not even another person, but the computer's ostracizing, the brain lights up the same way. It doesn't like it, right? We're hardwired for ostracism to hurt. And I think a lot of people see bullying as just that physical abuse or verbal abuse, but there is a social dynamics that can be used against people, which is bullying, because the brain interprets it the same way. Because what the brain says is that you're not a part of this group, and therefore you are unsafe. And so psychological safety is undermined, and then people know that they'll change their behaviors based to try to feel safe. So the bully tries to leverage that in order to get compliance, or to bully you into doing something that they want to do or not want to do.
So, and as you can see from what we're talking about, we're not talking just about assertive leadership or performance in managing underperforming staff. And, we need to be conscious of that. And there's always the context. It's not just a single event. There will be a context around that event. And we'll talk a little bit more about making sure that you capture all of that information and be informed as well. But
it's a case you could tick all of these and... It's unlikely that you wouldn't if you talk all of them, but you may only tick one of these and it be considered bullying. You may take them all, and it might be a little bit. It's just a guide for you to start thinking about things, or even as a guide of going, am I the one that's bullying in some sort of capacity, or am I watching bullying in front of me? It's just it's a helpful start guide to
get you thinking about antisocial behavior. So what we want to deep dive into, because we find it really, really fascinating, is this concept of bullying versus psychopathy.
Yeah, I mean, it's become quite popular nowadays to talk about the psychopath in the workplace, and anyone that does anything that's seen to be a bit antisocial or not lined up with you, you go, oh, he's just a psychopath, which couldn't be true, right? That's the thing, but it gets a bit overused. And so that we should start with, what's the difference between a bully and a psychopath? I suppose the first thing to remember about a bully is that a bully often uses the social dynamic in order to make themselves feel good. It's about their own insecurities being borne out onto other people. So they're scared of not being good, so they make someone else feel less good than them, which makes them feel better, right? This is all about them feeling good, or them making up for some deficiency that sits within their own selves. They're not actually thinking about the target. The target is kind of, you're there to make me feel good, and I'm not really thinking about you. There's a low empathy level. There's a low level of emotional intelligence that goes with bullies. A lot of studies, particularly mainly in schools, where they've done this, on any indicator of emotional intelligence, the lower they are, the more likely somebody is to be either the bully or the victim of bullying, interestingly enough. So emotional intelligence really can buffer this as well. So as you put more emotional intelligence in the workplace, you find less bullying occurring, because they're more emotionally intelligent, not just about what's happening around them, but about themselves, right? So there's an interesting correlation there. Psychopaths, on the other hand, are usually quite smart, and they've got a very high analytical understanding of emotions. They just don't care about it, and that's very, very different. And there's a joy that comes out of the malicious subjugation of a target for that bullying, and they will have a bully doesn't always have social awareness, like they're bullying, and there'll be somebody in the room that they don't know. A psychopath represents it really, really well. So a psychopath is somebody that is able to look and manipulate people for their own pleasure, basically, just because and it's interesting. If you do have a psychopath in the workplace, again, we're going to talk about this a bit later, but the last thing you want to do is actually label them a psychopath, because psychopathy is about behaviors, and it's about it's not it's kind of like a personality disorder from a psychological perspective, based on behavioral actions and behavioral. And this is different from a sociopath, right? So a lot of people say, what's the difference between a psychopath and a sociopath? Well, so it's really interesting, right? Sociopaths or sociopathic behavior is when somebody is doing some antisocial behavior that's considered by the broad population as being illegal. So there's a criminal element to it, but it's condoned by a subgroup. So particularly a group that they grew up in. So if a white supremacist was, doing something illegal based on race or things like that, but they would feel that it was condoned by their subgroup somehow, then that's sociopathic behavior, if that makes sense. It's a social pathology that sits and is accepted within a group. A psychopath, they're just on their own. They're just doing their own thing and looking at that. There's also another thing called antisocial personality disorder, which is different. Again, so this is the, if we're struggling to pull apart what's a psychopath or a bully, you can see when I start talking about that, be very, very careful about labeling other people. By labeling them, you could be inadvertently also bullying someone else who's just got struggles with empathy. You might be on an ASD thing. You just don't know, right? But it is true that a psychopath is always a bully. A bully is not always a psychopath. Right. So the way that a psychopath works will be to bully you and through bullying behaviors. That just because somebody is being a bully doesn't make them a psychopath. A bully actually can show remorse. A bully can show guilt. All these sorts of things. Remorse and guilt and empathy are not things that are hallmarks of a psychopath. They just don't have them. It's just, I don't feel guilty about what I did. I'm not going to apologize for it. Even if it seems abhorrent to you, right? So that's where we're starting to pull apart the difference between a bully and a psychopath. A bully has some capability to be redeemed and learned, empathetic, and guilt. Like you'll see guilt. A lot of time there's a blindness because of that low social intelligence. Just kind of blind to actually what's going on. It doesn't make it right at all. They still need to be held responsible for their behavior. Whereas a psychopath knows exactly what's going on and they just get some joy out of it and they don't feel guilty at all. So that's the big difference. And you do different things. But maybe you're a psychopath. Maybe you're listening to this. So this is really interesting, right? So psychopathy, the sort of the grandfather of looking at psychopathic behaviors is a guy called Robert Hare. And he's a guy that was working in prisons for years and years and years. And he would go into prisons with, mass murderers and people that were obvious psychopaths to try to pull apart what are the things that correlate between these people. It led to a lot of movies, and popular psychopathic movies are based on his work and pulling apart the mind of a psychopath, right? What was really interesting is that 20, 30 years later, after he's been in this, I can't remember how long it was, but for a long time where he's in the prison system, he started to then go out into the workplace and realize there's a large portion of the workplace that exhibits these same behaviors. It just doesn't always result in someone actually being murdered or prosecutable, but it has similar psychological impacts. Psychologically somebody is getting killed, not physically killed, but just psychologically crushed, and the same patterns emerge, right? So this is actually 20 questions. There's 2 slides
before you go into it, I've got an interesting stat. I was just looking up there as well. So among prisoners, the percentage with psychopathic traits has been estimated at 15 to 20%, but the psychopaths are also disproportionately represented in corporate culture. And among the higher echelons of large organizations, the psychopathy rate is an estimated 3.5%.
Yeah.
That's crazy. That's crazy. And there's some estimates for CEOs that go even higher.
Yeah. So it kind of makes sense because psychopaths are very good at up managing. All right. So anyway, we're gonna get more on that, but that's a really fascinating stat. I love it. I hate it and it scares me, but also it's fascinating, right? It's very curious. So these are the actual 20 questions or 20 areas that Hare pulled out in terms of actually identifying if there is a psychopath. And again, there's a massive nuance to these that sits behind this, but this will give you an understanding of the types of things that we look at. And you can see the first 10 there: glibness or harm. Do you have a grandiose sense of self-worth? Do you yourself feel like everyone else is a bit beneath you and you should be, if you were, prime minister, you do a better job. You actually believe that you do a better job as, president of the world or whatever. The proneness to boredom. I mean, this is, I fit into this category. It doesn't make it, but it's like a real proneness to just be bored and And psychopaths do not have any sort of longevity with any sort of concept. They lie all the time, and it's a habit. They're manipulative. There's complete lack of remorse or guilt. They just won't feel guilty, and so trying to talk about guilt. They're shallow. Their emotions are shallow. They won't have big highs and major lows. They'll kind of just sit around nothing. No empathetic. So this parasitic lifestyle is interesting. They'll latch onto people for a certain time because they feel like the world owes them, that they don't really owe the world. So they don't care that someone else is going broke while they're sleeping at their house and eating their food and doing that sort of things. They've got this parasitical nature, and then they'll just, when that like any sort of parasite, when that host dies, they just go and latch onto someone else, right? So they act very much like parasites and have poor behavioral controls. But that's just the first 10, right? Let's see what happens. Let's see what happens with the next 10. So they're very promiscuous. They don't care, right? So their promiscuous behavior knows, and to whatever end it is, it's just a thing.
And unlikely to have long-term relationships.
Absolutely,
it's just use and abuse.
They're not that. They have many actually short-term marital relationships, and so they cling on and then just leave, and they have no sense of loyalty, but they're very acute of how people are loyal to them. And so you're either loyal to them or you're not. And if you're not, you become a target, right? And even if you are, you can just be manipulated until you become a target. All of these sorts of things. So what I love about this is that a lot of people look at this list and go, wow, I could put myself on this list a lot of times over. And you sort of can. And this leads to a really interesting point, right? And the point is, is that using checklists to identify, psychopaths or bullying is good to do what we're doing. We're opening up a way of being able to talk about it. We're opening up sort of some things to focus on, some areas to focus on. But kind of like a checklist tries to make things very, very black and white. And the reality is that these are not black and white issues. These are grey. All sorts of shades of, and there's all sorts of color that needs to come onto these things in order to understand context. And it's like it's almost like the more you try to codify this, and even the way that the law and even HR policies tries to deal with this by trying to make things black and white, it can actually make things worse because that just creates the rules for psychopaths and bullies to get around, right? So you're giving them the playbook, and they're really good at the playbook, right? So these are really difficult and contextually nuanced things. And so to be able to have an open conversation about this is to be able to have a nuanced conversation about this. And that can be really hard when people are hurting, when serious psychological pain and damage has been inflicted, where there is victims that need to be heard and nurtured on all fronts. So yes, but definitely, and I'm responding to a question here. Psychopaths absolutely have no sense of guilt. But even if somebody says something that you think is hurtful to you, and somebody goes, "Well, that's just my job," there can be all sorts of reasons for a lack of guilt in that particular context. The thing about psychopaths is they have no guilt about anything. So just because it's domain specific that they have no guilt about a decision they had, the psychopath. That's the difference between individual and psychopathic guilt, which is they never have that emotion. It's not an emotion that exists for them, which is really interesting.
In this study that Hare did, being able to observe the stages that often victims will go through, and we thought this was interesting to share. Also, you might have a personal story where you may have worked with someone that now that you've sort of got that insight that you might think, actually, I think they might have been. So reflect on, was this your experience as well, or have you observed this experience in people around you that may have had to work with this type of person that lacks empathy, guilt and remorse, as you say.
And this is really important, particularly if you're the victim of a psychopath, because being able to see this process and link with it, you realize you're not alone. It's not because you're incapable. It's not because of any of the things that you're starting to believe about yourself. And hopefully by identifying this process, you'll be able to start to unpick it a little bit and build some of that self efficacy back into you.
Absolutely. So the first stage is usually the impressive first impression. So this is, as it took psychopaths, they know how to play the game. They know the rules of the playbook, and they're often quite charming. And they will tell a big story, and they will make it up if they need to in order to influence and to get, to build rapport quickly. So, there'll be larger than life types of personalities, the inspirational, big, fill the room, charismatic, that kind of, impressive, just impressive people. And the second step then is all about creating the rapport so that they can learn everything. So this is, unfortunately, is malicious intent, because it's about understanding where all your triggers and buttons are. So it might be, if they know that you're family orientated, it might be telling stories about them and their family so that you're more likely to open up and share intimate information about you, so that they then hold all the cards that they can potentially use in order to get better outcomes. It's
really interesting. These first two steps, right? They're really good things. Like, they're the things that we get anyone in any team to do and to build a good relationship, right? So these things in themselves, it's this next step that starts to jag, right?
Exactly. Because you'll start to notice this behavior, antisocial behavior, around where it's all take, where you find yourself potentially doing all the work and not getting credit, starting to be treated as more of a minion rather than an equal, but where it's their taking and not giving anything back. It becomes a very, very one-sided relationship because, as we said, you're being used, which leads into that whole being manipulated. So you start to go, you know what, hey, there should be some equality here. Because they know you, because they've invested that time in learning what all of your triggers and nuances, the things that you value and things that make you, they can then use that to their advantage to be able to, make you feel insecure, make you feel guilty, make you apologize. Like, if you're someone who is regularly, likes to help people, then they'll play on that. They'll know about you and draw on that in order to get what outcome and influence your behavior to, as you said, is about playing their playbook to get the outcomes that they need. This is probably the big red, where the red flags, I feel, start to really come into play, is when you go, you know what, actually, it's not safe for me to do something about it. So, you might be starting to get to a position here where you go, I think I'm being played here. This isn't fair. It's not right. I'm not comfortable. You start to get that realization that comes here, but it's also then you almost feel like you can't. If you challenge, for example, in an organization, if you challenge it, you're at fear that you'll lose your job, that you will be, that nothing will get done about it, and actually will just make it worse. Or in a relationship, there might be the fear of physical violence, or, there's lots of where that whole, I'm now trapped in this relationship that is toxic, whether it's a work relationship or a personal relationship.
And the truth is, you are. Like, that there is retribution. Like, if you're actually working with, if you're, a psychopath can be either your boss, a colleague, or a subordinate. If you're in the crosshairs of a psychopath, and you try to move against that person in any way that they see, which could be loyalty or even just challenging some of their behaviors, there will be retribution. There will absolutely be retribution. And it's something that you need to realize in the way that you go about trying to deal with this. But in terms of the phases, this will be really obvious to you. You will go, I'm now, that they actually, the manipulation, the guilt and denial undermines your belief in yourself. The risk of the reputation undermines your capability within the broader context, right? So they're undermining it all. So all of a sudden you become either completely dependent on them or discardable and trash on the side of the road. And that's the art of the psychopath, starting to manipulate people through this process. So this and if you're a victim, you'll know this. Like, it's really obvious. And by the time you get to the fifth stage, you're in line for some psychological harm. Like, you are probably experiencing trauma.
Yeah.
So,
Which leads to that final stage of being able to go, you know what, I am prepared to do something about it and taking action. And often there's several sort of steps in here around stages of going through self-blame and, you know, anger and wanting retribution and but also then getting to a place of acceptance and being able to close that chapter in your life, deal with it, move on, and hopefully be supported with that trauma.
Absolutely. Right. And it's not about social justice at this point. This is all about self-care, right? You've actually got to look after yourself more than what happens around the in sort of the broader context, right? This is about you. This is about realization, making a change in your own life, and giving you the space and the time and the resources to be able to recover. And it will take time to recover. You go through a grief cycle. A lot of people actually grieve the loss of the relationship that they had, because remember, these were a friend. This was an ally. This was a person that they trusted, and they got over that trust line. And once you're over that trust line, you've got to grieve the fact that they were never that person in the first place. And so you've lost that person. That's grief. You're going to be in grief, and that's going to be confusing, right? So we've got a question here about, can a psychopath come out of nowhere or be triggered by something whilst having appeared normal for a very long time? The short answer to that is very rarely do you start an interaction with a psychopath that doesn't seem normal. It always starts as normal. It's never, you never meet someone and immediately go, they're a psychopath. You meet someone, you actually like them. They are likable. They're impressive first. They create that trust with you. We've worked in politics on all sides of politics, and you know, there is a psychopathic tendency for people who want to go into a profession to go into professions where they've got a lot of control, and politics is one of those areas, particularly in the lower levels of politics. You'd think it'd be in the higher levels, but they've got more control of the lower, and so they're very, very good at that one-on-one conversation. But we've had to deal with a lot of staff in a lot of those in where they've been really abused in a small way. But that staff came on often for a pay cut because they really believed in what this person was doing. They loved this person, genuinely loved these and trusted these people, and it was a scenario where it was okay to give and take, right? They're a boss. They're in a position of social and civic power. So it's sort of allowed for that third step to appear normal. And so it's like at some point along this process, what is considered normal in that context is starting to get violated. So yes, it does appear normal because of the context that someone sits in.
Until it's not.
But again, that doesn't mean that people that start acting in abnormal behavior are psychopaths. That's a correlation causation. You know, sometimes people's life scenario just changes, and you've got to account for that as well. But yeah, I hope that kind of answers your question. So yeah, but in terms of if you are being bullied, what do you do, right? And this is this next step. So that's great. Now I know it. I know what a bully is. I know the process. I know I'm being bullied. What do I do about it? The first thing we always say is don't label anyone a psychopath. The label is not helpful. It actually can create huge problems for you, and also is a really obvious indicator to the psychopath that they're on it, and they will close ranks. And don't forget they are very good at representing. The second thing is know yourself, and by this we mean know what makes you, what good, your capability. What did you bring to the job? Why were you hired in the first place? What is your expertise that you have that may be being undermined or criticized or all these sorts of things by the person that you're being bullied by? And remember, a bully isn't a psychopath. We're starting to talk about bullying and things like that, but this is just bullying. So know that you're good at that. Feel confident in yourself that actually you're good at what you do. You are capable. You have relevance and can give in a meaningful way, and know that. So you're knowing yourself. You're not being egotistical about it. You just that's know yourself. That way, then you can understand, well, what utility am I giving to that person? Because that will start to show you where the manipulation lies, and then you need to understand, well, what's triggering me? Because Psychopaths and bullies are very, very good at being able to pick up a trigger and then push those buttons for their own personal gain. This is the thing. So if you understand your triggers and can mitigate for those triggers, when you can feel that emotional kick, we talk about it obviously in Decider as being you and your ape. When your ape goes into protection mode and lashes out, that can be used for good. So you'll be you might have put a complaint in, and then there'll be a group a meeting, and the psychopath will be in that meeting, and they'll know how to construct that meeting to push your triggers, and all of a sudden you in that meeting are triggered. You're the one that looks like you've got less control. All of a sudden you become the one that people are managing, that gets performance reviewed, right? And so this is the real importance to knowing those triggers and knowing yourself, because you're in a high stakes battle. And the psychopath, if you're with the psychopath, doesn't care about it, and the bully is insecure, so they're going to manipulate the situation
to make you look bad, so they look good.
Absolutely, right. So I often talk about, okay, we're going to do things, and what are the big 6 things that can be done when you are being bullied? So that's good at a higher level. But what are the actual things to do? And the first thing to do is know the law. You've got to know what are the processes and things that sit within your environment that allow you to understand the guardrails of what you're operating in and what you can and can't do.
So this is particularly about knowing the law, is that, we talked about codifying and trying, checklists and things there are things that have been put into place at a federal level that are try to help protect workers.
Yeah.
And so get familiar with it. So if you're dealing particularly with a scenario with, under 16-year-olds, you're now looking at child abuse type laws, but there's anti-discrimination laws, and there is so much being invested in occupational health and safety, all about trying to create psychologically safe workplaces for people. So get familiar with what those laws and what entitlements that you have as a result of those, which then allows you to then know the law. So this is culture. This is the law of the land. So this is about understanding what policies, what HR policies does your organization have, or what should they have? You understand what's happening at a federal level, understand what's happening at a local level, but also take it to the next level to understand what is the culture. So understand what's happened before. Have there been issues in the past, and how did the organization respond? Is it safe for you? When we talk about that fear of retribution, is it what are the ways? Is there a whistleblower? Is there a way that you can do this in a safe way to protect yourself in that circumstances and get to better understand? So know what happens. What happens from a legal perspective, but also understand what happens from a day-to-day and what's acceptable behavior. So we talked about that I can't speak English with.
Sociopathic?
Thank you. That one. So where it's an accepted norm, even though it's wrong. So just be aware of what those are. A
good way to look at this is the law is what's legal or not. So it's what's legal or illegal. What are the things, and that can be illegal from or illegal in terms of a HR policy thing. The law is about what's acceptable and what's unacceptable. So you can have something that's unacceptable but legal, and you can have something that's illegal but acceptable, right? And so you've got the understanding what's acceptable from different points of view. So your CEOs or your executives or your things, being able to put yourself in their shoes and go, what's that acceptable behavior that sits there? And this makes you then start to realize why an anonymous complaint may be obviously discarded as being superfluous or just somebody else trying to manipulate the system, and it's often disregarded because the law of the culture sort of dictates that. And so knowing that will help you navigate your context in a more adaptive kind of way. This leads to the second thing.
This absolutely, you need to document and recommend this for lots of different circumstances, but when you are particularly dealing with performance issues or behavior issues, whether you're the leader, whether you're potentially a victim in this situation, or you're observing it around you, document it. If we've learned anything from Johnny Depp's trial, the more evidence you have, the better, right? So, but make sure that you are documenting everything, because you cannot rely on your memory in these situations other than it's sketchy anyway. This is highly emotive context.
Yeah.
And when you are triggered, you won't be using the parts of your brain that are going to remember accurately and objectively. So make sure that you do document everything. Take really good records. I can't emphasize that enough.
And a great comment in there about those who deny communication and engagement as a form of punishment. So that ostracism, being ostracized, particularly in the remote situations where it's quite easy to do that. Again, documenting that, particularly as it relates to, so you got to remember that behavior is the big thing here. What you're wanting to document is behavior that's contrary to what's acceptable norms, both from a law perspective, LORE, and an LAW perspective. And being able to be articulate about that is really, really important. To linking it to outcomes, linking to stopping me doing what I need to do, but documenting that is so important. There is, even in a performance review scenario, ways that you can submit some of these documents and things in a way that puts them into the system so much as you can systemize it. Anyway, we've both got word salad. I think is really, really important, because labeling something, and this is the thing about the bad thing of labels are subjective. Behavior is not. So behavior is something that's unable to be subjective. So that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to take it out of subjective land, because the psychopath will already told all those people that are influencers that she's a bit of a complainer, a bit lazy, a bit incompetent, not really actually good at what they do. So they will have already managed up. You have to assume that management is already happening. So that's you going in subjectively head to head, you're always going to lose that one. You've got to create a scenario where you're basing commentary and observations on objective data, not subjective data. And objective data always relates to behavioral patterns, things that were done, things that weren't done, actual gaps, things like that.
Absolutely. And the next one is about seeking support from a trusted source. So now that you understand the lay of the land, and you will have a better appreciation for who you can trust and who you can't. So there might be people inside the organization. You might be able to trust your leader, but if your leader's obviously the suspected psychopath, you might want not to. But it could be someone outside of the organization. But find someone, because this is such an emotional issue and you are likely to have emotive responses to it. You want to make sure that you are getting the right support. So you're not trying to do it on your own, because often you will feel isolated, ostracized, and alone. So making sure that you've got someone in your corner as you go through this process. And it can be a lengthy process. So it's about sustainable resilience through what can be an emotionally draining and challenging experience.
And a trusted source, this sort of support, often it doesn't come from those people that are closest to us, so your romantic partners or your close friends, because what they will do is they will instantly take your side, right? And they will actually feel the pain one way up for you, and so they'll get, and they will have an emotive response. They'll have a load of response, but it's an unhelpful load of response. You need to seek source from a source that you trust, that sits outside that relational complexity, which is actually what's going to be helpful for you in this scenario.
And then depending on if you're dealing with bullies or psychopaths, and depending on this context, as we said, it's all about the color and about the bigger story, but you've kind of got two options here. If you can, call them out, but if you can't, then get out. So you've really got to fix it or leave kind of situation here, depending on how severe the situation is. And it'll be a tough decision to make, because we've already highlighted that you may have fear of retribution. So absolutely appreciate that this is a challenging thing, but you've got those kind of options.
And I would say that the biggest advice for somebody working with a psychopath most of the time is to get out. That's actually the result of it. It's not about changing the system. If you're the CEO of a company, you feel there's a psychopath underneath and you've been able to identify it, and good to you, that is super hard to identify because of the upward representation. But what you can do is to get them out of the organization, give them a new company that they're going to do where they can fail, because they will fail. They'll be terrible at it. But you've got to figure out a way to adaptively get them out of the company. You don't want them in the company, even if they look like that they're being a great leader. They're not.
And lastly, consider taking it further. Consider not just making a complaint within your organisation, but taking it to authorities. And particularly if it's physical violence and sexual harassment, absolutely, you need to consider taking it to authorities, but also taking it to the police. We do want to make a difference and make workplaces psychologically safe, and nothing will change if nothing changes.
That's right. But make sure that this is the important word here is consider. This is not advice to make a formal complaint. Consider your situation, just because we've seen that it's not always the right way to go. And more often than not, it can be the wrong way to go. Again, because you've been painted as incompetent, disloyal, and a complainer. And so this would just fit the narrative. They call it a psychopathic fiction that they've created about you in the organisation. And you'll just play into that if you complain a lot of the time. So it's about considering it. And often people make a complaint once they've already chosen to leave on their own terms. And leaving on your own terms is so important in this sort of scenario.
And it possibly even is after you've left. So you're out into a safe environment. I'm just going to share a link also in the chat channel. There is a government website that's got links to all of the different support channels that you might want to consider, including some legal paths as well. So that wraps us up for today. We are out of time, but just...
I do want to do a plug. Can
please,
I plug Snakes
absolutely.
and Suits? If you want a book that really goes into that, and this is not our book, we don't get any
there's no kickbacks.
There's no kickback, but this is a great book. It's written by the same guy here that I talked about before. That's the grandfather. Not only is this a really easy read, you can see that I've bookmarked quite a lot of it. It's got a really great appendix of some other great resources. So if you think this has triggered you and you want to go a bit deeper, I highly recommend this book as a starting point for you to keep digging further.
Absolutely. Thank you. And that wraps us up for this session. We hope to see you at our next session, which will be in July, where we're going to talk about optimal stress.
Yeah.
So we'd love to keep this conversation going, though. If you do have any further questions, comments, or feedback, please reach out. Let us know. We'd love it if you'd follow us on our usual social media channels, including subscribing to the YouTube channel. Here's our email address there. Please
reach out. And remember, if you are being a target of a bully or a psychopath in the workplace, it happens to a lot of people. You're not alone, and you are okay. You're good at what you do. You are a good human being in a bad situation, and you get out of that bad situation, there will be light at the end of the tunnel, right? And you are a competent, beautiful human being. I can say that without even seeing you, right? Because the reason you're being bullied and a target of psychopath is because you are a competent, beautiful human being. So take that as in and of itself a sign that you are a confident, beautiful human being. And on that,
we are tapping out. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, guys.